Tensions in the Russian army occupying Ukraine do not end. Thousands of Russian soldiers have started a mutiny. Russia cannot fight these rebellions. The Russian army is on the verge of disintegration. So what is happening in Russia? How are the revolts in the Russian army coming to an end? Let's find the answers to these questions together. Since the start of the war on February 24th, there has been a mutiny almost every day. Russian soldiers do not want to participate in this war. The percentage of those who support this war in Russia is very low. When Putin started this war, the majority of the soldiers serving in the Russian army did not support this war. That's why Russian soldiers were forcibly sent to Ukraine. Soldiers who did not want to go to Ukraine gave Russian commanders a hard time. Russian commanders said that Ukraine would surrender without an armed conflict, because Russia had the second largest army in the world. No one expected Ukraine to resist Russia. After Putin's decision to invade, all eyes turned to Ukrainian leader Zelensky. Zelensky, who took office in 2019, made statements that surprised everyone. He said that the Ukrainian army will resist this invasion and they will never allow Russia to take over Ukraine. After this statement, the motivation and courage of the Ukrainian army increased. Russian soldiers, on the other hand, panicked. After Zelensky's statements, the Russian soldiers panicked and went to their commanders. But the commanders had nothing to say. Russian commanders did not expect Ukraine to resist either. This caused the first big disappointment among Russian soldiers. The Ukrainian army showed a very successful resistance against the Russian operations. The Ukrainian army, which managed to stop the Russian army on the west bank of the Dnipro River, started to carry out strategic operations in this process. The Ukrainian army monitored all movements in the regions occupied by Russia with drones. These drones detected the coordinates of all ammunition depots of the Russian army. The Ukrainian army attacked these coordinates using HIMARS. As a result of these strikes, most of the ammunition depots of the Russian army were destroyed. Russian soldiers panicked after successive explosions at Russian bases. In this process, many soldiers fled the army and riots broke out in many regions. After the operations carried out by the Ukrainian army, all the stocks of the Russian army started to run out. The food stocks of Russian soldiers were largely depleted. Russian soldiers have no food and are not adequately fed. They are also poorly clothed. When soldiers share these problems with their commanders, they cannot find any solution. In the Russian army, 2,500 soldiers who told their commanders about the problems they were experiencing revolted. Because the Russian commander was very drunk and did not respond to any of the soldiers' demands. In this incident in Kazan, Russia, riot police were sent to the area against soldiers who defied their commanders. One soldier said the following in his social media posts: "The general was rude and drunk. He reacted very harshly to our demands and filed a complaint." The rebel soldier also said, "We have rusty machine guns from the 1970s. It is too dangerous to shoot with them." After the explosion of the Russian army's ammunition depots, Russia has a huge arms stockpile problem. Russian soldiers do not have enough weapons. In addition, in many regions, the Ukrainian army confiscated Russian weapons. As a result of Ukrainian raids, Russian soldiers fled from many regions. All the weapons found in these regions have fallen into the hands of the Ukrainian army. To solve this problem, the Russian army opened military depots left over from the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. The weapons in these warehouses were distributed to Russian soldiers. However, these weapons were very old and rusty. These weapons often jammed and caused many accidents. Russian soldiers no longer want to use these weapons. One of the biggest reasons for the revolts in the Russian army is these rusty weapons. These are not the only problems Russian soldiers face. One of the problems that the revolting Russian soldiers say is that their requests to meet with their families are denied. After the major defeat in Ukraine, Russian leader Putin declared a mobilization order and conscripted 300,000 more soldiers into the army. However, Russian citizens reacted strongly to the mobilization decision. Young men who can be drafted into the army have started to leave Russia. Long queues have formed at Russia's borders. Many Russian citizens left the country illegally. The kilometers-long queues at the borders of Russia made Putin very angry. Putin gave instructions to recruit soldiers into the army as soon as possible. Following Putin's instructions, the mobilization order was quickly implemented. Russian citizens were forcibly conscripted into the army. However, these soldiers had no training. Russia decided to give them military training at military bases in cities like Kazan and Belgorod. During these trainings, Russian soldiers were not allowed to meet their families. This made the Russian soldiers very angry. After the mobilization decision, most of the citizens recruited into the army had to quit their jobs. This has taken a huge toll on the Russian economy. Soldiers' families are struggling to make ends meet. Russian soldiers say that they should be paid, but the Russian government is not taking any steps in this regard. The families of conscripted soldiers in Russia are joining the protests in the squares of the cities. Recently, 39 soldiers from the 252nd Motorized Rifle Regiment sent to the Luhansk region also started a mutiny. The soldiers who fled from the army after the mutiny made a video and explained the problems they faced. Russian soldiers say they were treated very badly. A soldier speaking in the video said they were not even allowed to take a shower. Another soldier said that the water supply in the region where he was sent had to run out, and that water could not be supplied for a long time. Russian soldiers had to drink water from a puddle. Wounded soldiers could not be treated, and many died. The Russian soldiers were outraged that their friends were left to die. Russian soldiers feel that their lives are not valued. A look at the data shows that the Russian soldiers were right. In the Russian army, 740 soldiers lost their lives in the last 24 hours alone. The total death toll in the Russian army has exceeded 96,000. But despite this, the Kremlin administration insists on continuing this war, because Russia does not want to accept defeat. Putin's political career in Russia depends on this war. Putin, currently one of the longest-serving leaders in the world, may have to end his political career after this war. Soldiers revolting in Russia are giving Putin a big shock. Putin, whose power and prestige in Russia is diminishing day by day, was planning to win a war victory in Ukraine to prove his power. However, the resistance of the Ukrainian army disrupted Putin's plans. Putin knows that if he loses this war, he will have to resign from his post. That's why he is doing everything he can to win this war. It doesn't matter to Putin if Russian soldiers die. It is becoming increasingly difficult for Putin to win this war, because after the mutinies in the Russian army, the motivation of the soldiers is completely gone. Russian soldiers do not want to die for Putin. Mutinies in the Russian army are expected to increase. The Kremlin administration cannot do anything against the rebellion of the soldiers. What do you think about the military mutinies in Russia? Do you think Putin's government will be able to prevent them? How do the mutinies affect the course of the war? Are Russian soldiers right to mutiny? Share your views with us. Follow us for more updates.